believe in the ripple effect.
What's up? What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Rico the Renaissance, also known as Ricky Variance, and a great episode for you today. Today we have the host of the Courtenay Turner podcast, of course, Courtenay Turner. And Courtenay has an amazing story, and she's super fascinating because she's into so many different topics, which makes for some of my favorite type of conversations where we go into so many personal stories, personal perspectives, different things we research, different things we're curious about. So hopefully you guys enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Of course, I have to remind you guys, this is a value for value show. If you get some value out of this conversation or any of the conversations that I work really hard to bring to you, please consider giving some value back. I put in a lot of effort into trying to bring the most interesting people, interesting researchers, thinkers, authors, musicians, hoping to spark some of the most interesting conversations that hopefully bring value to your life and your worldview. So hopefully, if you do get some value out of this, you will take a minute to return the favor and either donate via PayPal, Patreon, purchasing some merch. We have a crypto wallet. You can purchase my music. You can check out the University of Reason or purchase Element Electrolytes, which the link is on my website, along with links to all the other ways you can help support the show. But of course, if you can't support the show financially, don't worry about it. Rate, review, tell people about the show. Post it on your social media accounts, post it on your video platform accounts, anywhere and anywhere. It's open source. The most important thing is trying to get the message out there. As you can imagine, the algorithms are suppressing shows like mine, so any help goes a long way. And thank you in advance if you do support the show financially or any of those other ways. And you can find all these links on the rippleeffectpodcast.com or just check out the show description on whatever platform you're listening or watching the Ripple Effect Podcast. Enjoy this conversation. I have plenty of awesome conversations right around the corner already recorded, just looking for time to edit and release them. So keep a lookout, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.
I believe in the ripple effect.
So I've actually only done one other podcast before, and it was in person. So
Scott,
yeah, so I don't what
with Scott, right?
with Scott. Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah, it's cool. It's and I actually listened to some of that
oh,
discussion.
did you? Okay, cool.
And yeah, because Scott was, it was funny because Scott was when he got into podcasting with his initial podcast, Truthzilla, he was contacting Sam, he was contacting myself, he was listening to some of our shows, and I always just liked him. He seemed really motivated and intrigued and willing to learn. And so we connected, and then we kind of just became friends since. And I remember inviting him on the Union of Unwanted, and then seeing him connect with other people because of it. So it's, I mean, he's accomplished a lot in such a small period of time. I keep telling him, like, you don't give yourself enough credit. You know, he keeps, anytime I talk to him, he still talks to me like I'm this like wise elder. And I'm, you know, even though I've been doing this podcast since 2013,
Wow.
like I told Scott, I'm like, you always feel like you're late to the party, regardless when you start. Like I felt like I was late to the party at 2013. People who started even before me probably felt the same way. So it's, you know, because there's always going to be somebody who obviously is doing it before you, and you always feel like, oh, it's late. But you know, the best thing to do is just do it, regardless. You know, and yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, go on. Yeah.
No, it's yeah.
To do it. Yeah, I feel so late to the party. Like, yeah. I mean, I really just started like a year and a half ago, I guess. Yeah. So very much feel like
as a swapcast, which and I love swapcast because of the reason Scott told you. So for people listening, because I'll probably use this small talk in the show. For
Mhm.
people listening who don't know who we're talking about Scott from Truthzilla, now the Rebunked podcast, and what he said on your show is really what I think what a lot of us love about the podcast community is that people use Swapcast as a way of connecting with other audiences,
Mhm.
helping each other out. And there's like no real competition between podcasters, which is awesome. Like you meet people and you would think like I don't know, like you would run into some people who are maybe envious or some people who don't want to help others because they're maybe afraid their show's going to get big. Well, like there's none of that, at least not in the community that we've kind of created. And
No.
the Union of Unwanted has become a great way with even like taking that to another level, because instead of just doing a swap cast and bringing together two audiences, we bring, and I don't know if you're familiar with that show, the Union of Unwanted, but it's basically like a big
Mhm.
conference Zoom call with a bunch of podcasters and
Yeah.
content creators and thinkers and doctors and whoever we decide to invite. So it's everybody ends up meeting some new faces, connecting with maybe some people they haven't connected with before, and it's a way of kind of growing, because really at the end of the day, like it's all about trying to get these conversations out there and connecting with some interesting people. I've heard you say it, and we have actually a lot in common, not just mutual friends, because I know Matt's also a mutual friend of ours from
Mhm.
Content Safe. But we have a lot of mutual interests. Like you're big into health and nutrition, exercise.
Yeah.
Probably been one of the people in the alternative media community or conspiratorial pot, whatever you want to call it, where
Right.
I probably have I've dived much deeper in those topics, because I'm also into diet and exercise. I've had Rob Wolf on, and
Awesome.
Dr. Don McDeagostino, and
Awesome.
Dr. Sean Baker, and throughout the years, Dr. Brzezinski, and
Wow. How
so.
cool.
Well, it's cool that you even know these people, because most people in the community don't even know who I'm talking about. Like I thought having Dr. Rob Wolf and or not Dr. Rob Wolf, but Rob Wolf and Dr. Dominic D'Agostino were like huge just bucket list guests from me. I'm like, I love these guys. They've been a huge part of my understanding of how to eat and what to eat, and the potential of the human body. And but a lot of people, they're like, I want to hear about JFK. So it's like,
Right.
but
Yeah. And Brzezinski, I mean, he's awesome. And his story. Yeah.
you watch his
Yeah.
documentary, his
I watched it years ago. I would love to revisit it now, knowing what I know now. I feel like this past year I really dove so much into, as you've probably seen, if you've seen I do a lot with the doctors and, diving into the medical tyranny side of things. And I've definitely had quite a journey looking into the history of medicine this past year. And it's been an interesting journey for me, and not the easiest one, actually. But yeah, so I think, when I first saw that documentary, I didn't have the same lens. So my perspective was very different. I mean, it was still, awe-inspiring and, incredible what he's done. But now I have such a different perspective, because I know so much more about the history of, big pharma and the medical industry and the corruption and a lot of the big lies that, I wasn't privy to previously. So, yeah.
Yeah, and one great documentary, I actually just shared it because I think somebody sent it to me. It's now on YouTube again, because I believe it was removed off Amazon Prime. It's called The Big Secret. I tweeted it not too long ago, and it's a great documentary about the history of, and it was the filmmakers were Dr. Susan Dowd, and I forget who the other filmmaker is, but it was a great film. It was on Amazon Prime for free forever, and then they removed it, just like they removed, I believe, some of Brzezinski's stuff and Vaxxed and a bunch of stuff. And it was almost like they were preparing for like, hey, let's anything that's going to make people skeptical about big pharma, let's start removing that stuff now before it really bites us in the ass. But it goes into that whole history, which I think is so crucial, because so many people don't understand that a lot of things are called like pseudoscience or mystical or supernatural, or like kind of laughed at as medicine, was medicine for a long time. Root extract, foods, teas, meditation, like these are all things that have been used forever for mental and physical health. And because of the money motives, that's when we transition into this synthetic world where where now we're dominated by things that we call medicines that are really synthetic drugs.
Yeah. So a couple of things there. So firstly, in the I think it was around like 1640s, there was the East India British company, and they were essentially partnering up with the insurance companies. This was like the big boom. I don't think it was the origin per se, but it was definitely the big explosion of the big cartel. Because back then the East Indian British Company did like teas and opium and coffees and sugar. Those were the big drugs, and the insurance companies were protecting the big pharma cartel that has now become what it is today. I call it like the MIC is like the military industrial complex, but it's also the medical industrial complex, right? And then of course there's the Flexner report in 1910, which was Rockefeller hired Flexner to put out this report to basically, it was the inception of defunding all all naturopathic medicine in favor of allopathic, in favor of anything that was using petropharmaceuticals, because Rockefeller had the monopoly on the petroleum industry. So he was taking petrochemicals and turning them into pharmaceuticals. And so he defunded any schools that didn't have pharmaceutical component. He defunded all licensing. But that was the genesis of that. And I live in one of the two states where it's actually illegal to have a naturopathic license. And it's because Big Pharma owns us. It's only two. It's Tennessee and West Virginia.
Really?
Yeah.
And wow. Yeah, I live in Massachusetts. It's not a much better state, but I think it's legal to have naturopathic doctors.
Yeah.
But
there's something called like it's the something deed act in Tennessee. I'm blanking on the name of the deed. I'd have to look it up, but it's where like it can't be independent. It has to go through the hospitals. And Vanderbilt, which is, one of the office families, pretty much owns the medical industry in Tennessee. I don't know who owns it in West Virginia, but I knew that before I moved here. I was like, yeah, that's the one downside, is that they're really owned by Big Pharma.
So I know I should probably ask you for a little bit of an origin story right in the beginning, but for people listening who might not be familiar with maybe your work, what led you to podcasting and being intrigued with these topics, did you mind sharing a little bit of your story?
Yeah, sure. So my story in podcasting, or like my overall kind of story.
Well, that's probably all connected, right?
It is all really connected. So, okay. So I was living in California during, I was living in California for a long time. I'm originally from right outside New York City. I was an actress. I had a theater company in New York, started doing film, moved out to LA to pursue film, very cliche kind of thing. And then I got into producing. I was doing a lot of producing in New York. I always joke about this because it was, indie kind of film and theater. And essentially something always like everything would just get stopped because funding would be missing. Right. And I would get frustrated because I'm like, I became an actress so I could play. Like, what needs to happen so I can play? Like, get the show on the road. Right. And they're like, there, little girl, we need like this money, this set, this whatever, all these things, this actor. I'm like, okay, so if all these things happen, then I can play. Right. And they're like, yeah, sure, if that happens. So I would start bringing these pieces together, and they're like, well, now you're a producer. So when I moved to LA, I moved really to pursue film, but I got into independent producing, and I had then kind of shifted into, as you may imagine, the film industry is not the easiest to break into, and I was not the only actress in LA. So I had tried out for American Ninja Warrior. And I started to get, very involved in like the fitness industry. And when I tried out for American Ninja Warrior, I'll make the story really brief, but it was basically the first time my video accidentally leaked. You have to do a submission video to tell your story, right? And mine accidentally leaked, on Facebook. overnight. It was seen by thousands of people, but it was the first, I got a call actually from he was one of my producing partners, but he's also a lawyer at 6 a.m. and saying, I saw your video. And I'm like, yeah, I made it, private. I sent it in a message. I wanted your feedback. And he said, no, it's up. It's, public. Somebody shared it. And I immediately started like bawling. And he's like, legally, you're fine. You say it's a submission video. The worst they can do is not pick you. And he said, I think that's what's going to happen, because what's interesting about your story. So, for American Ninja Warrior, for those who don't know, a lot of times it's like people overcoming something, right? And then you're rooting for them because you want to see them run this course knowing their challenges. And he said, but the interesting thing about your story is it's actually more interesting to see you do what you do and then hear your story than it is to hear your story. So then I'll get you to, and he said, I just, have never heard you share your story publicly. I mean, he had known me for well over a decade at that point. So he said, I've never heard you share publicly, and it's very personal. I didn't know if you wanted to share it. So so my story is that I was born with congenital rubella, and my mom was sick during the first trimester of pregnancy, rendered me with several complications. I'm blind in one eye. I wear bilateral hearing aids. I didn't get hearing aids until I was almost 6 years old, though. So I learned how to speak by reading lips, because I have very, very significant hearing loss. I had heart surgery when I was a year old, stunted growth, fine graphic motor impairment, hypotonic limbs, all sorts of complications. They told my mom the best she could hope was to find a nice institution for me to spend my life. Fortunately, my mom did not agree. So we'll go fast forward. I had kind of come up with this concept. I didn't get picked to run the course, and I really mourned. I didn't do pull-ups for 6 weeks. So anybody who knows me knows that was like really, really serious and tragic, but I emotionally couldn't handle it. I was like, I need a little breather. So I paused, and after 6 weeks, I was like, okay, Courtenay, it's time to, pick yourself up, snap out of this and figure out what you're going to do, move on with life, but I was really devastated because I put so much of my heart and soul into it. And the training was really rigorous and it was really tough. But I met wonderful people. And through it, I came up with this concept. I was like, I am a believer that you should take, not just like the hard lessons from something, but, really like, what is something that will propel you forward? What is a lesson that you learn from an experience that may not have been so positive, but that, it inspires you to keep going? And the overwhelming response I got from people was how inspired they were by my story. And, I'm not very inspired by me because, I live with me day in, day out. And so, it's kind of old news, but I thought to myself, wow, well, how awesome would it be if I had a show about athletes with disabilities, and it would be a conduit that would be vindicating and rewarding for them, inspiring for the audience. So I started to talk to all these athletes with disabilities. And the more that I talked to them, the more I realized they don't move in spite of, they move because of. And so this prompted, the impetus for a show I created was called WIM, What is Movement? And so all this to say, I got very involved in circus arts, in fitness industry. I became a CrossFit coach, trainer, an aerial acrobatic performer, and a motivational speaker sharing my story. So I went from not talking about it at all to, well, I think this is, something I can do that will inspire others, and could be a win-win for everyone. So I was really starting to break into speaking when the lockdowns began. So I had several, I had done a couple, and then I had booked several speaking events, and obviously that all got canceled. There's no public speaking events. I did do a couple on Zoom, but you can't really do aerial acrobatics. I can show videos, but I wasn't going to do them like in my apartment in California. So, I do the aerial. I don't, sometimes I'll just do speaking, but I do the aerial to show people what's possible when nobody thought it was, right? So it's entertaining. But it's also like, it seals the message for me. So anyway, all this to say that I was in California and it was super locked down, and I was so incredibly depressed because I couldn't talk to people. And being hearing impaired, I depend so largely on lip reading. I mean, I think the masks are devastating for everybody for so many reasons, for, the emotional, spiritual, medical, the list goes on and on. But for me, it was that much more challenging because I really couldn't communicate with people. And I became so depressed and isolated. And I I had started thinking that I was going to write because, I got fired from both of my gym jobs. So I had a lot more time on my hands. The speaking events all got canceled. And I was so anxious and depressed, and I could feel, I'm very empathic. I could just feel the weight collectively of, the world and the world around me, that I was just not in a position to be creative. And so I said, okay, well, I'm going to order some books and start reading, and maybe that'll inspire me. And I ordered like 11 books that day after 10-hour period of watching a blank screen stare back at me, and realized I was not going to be writing right now. So, and then I started to have all these ideas, and I felt like part of the problem in the world is that a lot of people who have views that are alternate to the mainstream engage in auto critique. And we saw how that went during the Maoist struggle sessions. And I was like, that didn't go so well. So if I feel that that's part of the problem and I know where that leads, I don't want to be a part of the problem. And so I started speaking out. And so I started sharing articles on social media, which led to me getting into lots of fights with people on social media. And people started suggesting that I do a podcast. And at first really, really terrified me. And then I started to think, well, regardless of what I did with the podcast, at least, even if it was on Zoom, if I could see a person's naked, bare face and have a meaningful conversation, that might pull me out of, the depths of despair that I was currently in. So very long-winded, but that's my story.
No, but that's a absolutely amazing story. It's, the mind and body, it's all connected, and it's important to exercise both, to worry about the health of both. And it's weird because you can physically, if you exercise physically, it helps you mentally. If you exercise mentally, it doesn't really help you physically, per se. It doesn't make you faster, stronger,
right.
But it might motivate you to do the things that does make you faster and stronger, because so much of what I'm a big fan of, like, self-motivation and discipline. And, when I had Dr. Sean Baker on my show, I did the carnivore diet for a couple of weeks just to see if I could do it. I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to like it. I don't know. I eat a kind of a carnivore type of diet anyways. I call it a ketovore because it's mostly meat anyway. So it wasn't a huge, but the big change to me was like not marinating stuff, not throwing a bunch of spices on meat. And then the alcohol consumption. I like wine with my meat, so it's like
I do too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm Portuguese, so it's like I have to, to me, I can't even eat without having wine. It's just one of those things. I'd like having a glass of wine. They complement what I'm eating. It goes hand in hand. I couldn't imagine having, like, I don't know, just water or something flavorless. But it's so that was like the hardest part. But it was like, I love having those mental discipline exercises. Like, can I only eat meat for strictly, like, not even anything else, just coffee and meat. And I would limit myself to like a half a glass of wine with dinner. I'm like, I can't do this if I don't have at least a half a glass of wine. So that was like where I cheated a little bit, but it didn't affect any of my results. I felt amazing. But my point is, like, it was a discipline. And I would tell people, I'm like, try the carnivore diet. I'm like, worst case scenario, you have taught yourself how to do something that you don't want to do for some greater good or for some health, because we procrastinate and find reasons all the time to not go to the gym, to not exercise, to not do this, to not do that. And I'm a big believer of, like, if you just remind yourself that I could be making a excuse right now to procrastinate, then just you having that internal conversation will lead you down the path of questioning, like, maybe I should do this, and maybe I should stop being a wimp and go ahead and do it, and because if not, it is a slippery slope of like, okay, well, today I don't do it because I'm tired, tomorrow I don't do it because I didn't sleep enough, the next day I don't do it because I don't have enough time, and it just is slippery slope. It's like, don't take no as an answer and just stop making it. And I feel guilty about everything, and my sometimes my wife will be like, don't be so hard on yourself if you have a piece of cheesecake. I'm like, you don't understand. I'm like, I don't see it as a character flaw. I see it as a weapon to do better the next day. It's like, anytime I think I might have overreacted a little bit on my kids, or I think that I could have, had a better workout and I was lazy and I showed up, but I had a lazy work. Like, it just ponders or it stays on like in my consciousness, and it just stays kind of, and it just kind of marinates there until eventually I'm like, you know what, tomorrow I'm gonna wake up and have a great workout, because if I don't, I'm gonna keep just beating myself up over this. And then
Yeah.
it's that little bit of motivation. But how different is it than a athlete who remembers the coach that benched them, or remembers the guy who smoked him in a game and he couldn't keep up with them, and he talked a bunch of trash, and they felt helpless, like they couldn't do anything because he was such a better athlete. Like, you remember those times, you remember those events, you remember those experiences, because you use this as self-motivation to push harder, to do better. Every great athlete, every not even just athlete, like I remember listening to Valuetainment, Patrick David. Well, he has like 3 first names all in one name. It's like Patrick.
Yeah.
It's just a little confusing to remember the order of all of them, but it's Patrick. He he talked about bullies, and he's like how so many people that he knows, including himself, that are successful, like had bullies or people who told them they weren't good enough, and the motivation to prove them wrong was, basically what led them down the path of success. So
Yeah.
and so if you change the way you look at things, the way you look at changes, like instead of looking at a bully as a way of finding like, maybe they're right, and then start feeling bad about yourself, you use it as your motivation to do better.
Totally. So what's so interesting is with my speech, when I would talk about, I say movement is a metaphor for life. And I would talk about using your physical training as a teacher to overcome adversity in other areas of life, because it's so concrete. Your physical training is like, for if you take like a weight, you either lift it or you don't, it's like, it's, you can't argue with it. It's very, very concrete. And so I think there's so many lessons that can be learned in that. But what I think is interesting in what you're saying about how it teaches you, like, and motivates you. And I always talk about, like, I remember once I had a friend, I was trying to climb a pegboard with a 53-pound kettlebell. And he asked me, he was like, so what's that about? Like, you want to get to the top of like a pegboard with, half your body weight attached to you, And I was like, no, it's really not about that. It's just about proving to myself that I can do hard things. And I think that's what's so great about physical training, because everybody's going to experience challenges in life. Like, that's one of those things we just cannot escape. And so if you give yourself challenges that you can actually overcome, I think that's so empowering, and it teaches you and gives you the confidence to then go out and take on other challenges in other areas. So
Yeah, it's weird because I think like growing up, I was also very artsy. My first passions were like drawing and music and all the artsy stuff. And I kind of looked at like organized sports as, and a little bit was just like me rebelling a little bit. I was an immigrant kid, came to America, told everybody my name was Ricky because Ricardo kind of gave it away that I was an immigrant. So I'm like, I'm like, Ricky sounds more American. Let me tell everybody my name's Ricky. And so I think a little bit was like trying to fit in. And then when you can't fit in, you kind of push back and go in the opposite direction. It's like, well, if I can't fit in, then I'm going to be a metalhead and skateboard and do things that aren't organized sports. And so that's what I did. And I kind of, and then being kind of artsy and having that type of mindset, I looked at a lot of like exercise and all that stuff is like, okay, yeah, it's great, but I'm like, how beneficial is it really? Or team sports, is it, how beneficial is it really in your development? And then as you get older, I got into sports, and I got into basketball, and then soccer, and those are kind of the 2 sports that take up most of my life. And I became a gym rat. Since I was, I don't know, in my teens, probably can count on one hand how many weeks in my life I had a full week off from the gym. Like it's like breathing. It's like it's not a thing I do. It's what keeps me alive, and it's like I'm not the same person if I don't go to the gym. If I'm not,
me too.
I mean, we go on vacation. Like I need to find, like I can get away with like a day or two. After 2 days, I'm going crazy. Like I need to go do something, and just to feel like I earned also the meal that I'm trying to enjoy and earn the relaxing. I can't relax when I don't understand people who can do that. Like I'm like, I feel like I have to earn it. And maybe I could have a similar experience without earning it, but to me, it's like I'm not sure I would enjoy it as much if I it's no different than, it's like that saying, satisfaction is the death of desire. It's like you earn something, and that satisfaction is going to be, that desire is going to be gone immediately. But if you work really hard, you appreciate a little more. And
Totally.
yeah, so it's something that I think people who exercise in gym, like I talk to a lot of people at my gym, because obviously I'm probably a little bit of a chatterbox if you ask most people, but but I love learning from other people's experiences and stories and all that type of stuff. And I think even some of the most casual conversations, and people that you would think like maybe don't have seem like the most interesting person on a surface level, you get to hear their story, you get to know them a little bit, and you're like, oh wow, everybody has something. Yeah, it has something you can learn from, some life experiences that you can take something from. And some of my most intriguing conversations on the podcast has been with probably lesser known people. And
Mhm.
some of the conversations that I'm like, that what didn't go nearly as the way I expected. Or some people that are bigger names and people that are more famous, like, they're not really as interesting as I thought they were. So,
Right.
but you talk to people at the gym, and so many of the older people, like my age, I'm 37 and up, like we talk about how like the gym isn't about physical health anymore. Like we're there for our mental health. And
Totally.
yeah, and do you similar with yourself?
Oh my gosh, totally. And when you talk about like, going crazy after a few days, I remember being on a trip with my mom, and I don't know, I think like 3 days had gone by or something. And my mom was like, Courtney, you just go to the gym. And we couldn't feed, like the schedule just really packed. And so finally, so I did. And then I came back, and the next day she says to me, I'm going to let you go every day because you're just a much more pleasant person when you've had your workout. I was like, yeah, I know. It just makes me a happier person. Like, I just don't feel like it really is so much about the mental. It's not just the endorphins though. There's something about feeling like there's something accomplished, and you did something hard and you tackled it. Yeah,
Well, that, and I also think we're designed for physical activity, right? Like,
we are.
I mean, I had this filmmaker CJ Hunt. He did one of the best documentaries on diet and nutrition called
Mhm.
The Perfect Human Diet, and he was
Uh,
a athlete, professional athlete who was having all these health issues, and he's like, okay, let me figure out what's wrong with my diet. He's online, and of course, like any person, you're going to find all these conflicting studies. Like this study says cholesterol is bad, this study says cholesterol has been demonized,
yeah.
and it's like, and so there's all this stuff. So he literally had a journey that he documented in this film, basically trying to figure out what is the perfect human diet. And I remember this one part of the film that kind of stuck with me, because it could kind of you could visualize what they were saying. They were on a football field and going down this football field. I think he was with like a historian. That's what made the documentary interesting, and I think unique from other ones about the topic, is because he talked to historians and anthropologists and farmers. Even farmers, like
Yeah.
in
Wow.
the farmers' books, it's like, how do you plump your animals? You you increase and uptake their carbs, and it's like, so it's like, wait, like we even farmers know that that's how you gain weight. But he was on this football field with, I believe, like a historian or anthropologist, and they're going down this football field, and like when they get to certain yard lines, they're like, okay, from here to here, humans ate like this, and then from here to here, like this was introduced, and and then he gets to the very, very end, and it looks like there's like 1 inch, and there's a little mark. And he's like, look behind you. He's like, more or less, we've eaten pretty similar foods, things we can pick, things we could grow, things we could kill for since the beginning of human civilization. And he's like, and for this little inch on this football field, he's like, this is how long we've been eating the modern diet. And so you look at like how unnatural the way we eat is,
Yeah.
and then you look at like how unnatural the way we live is, because
Yeah.
also if you looked at that same football field, you could almost make the argument that for since the beginning of time, we've had to move much more, we've had to exercise much more, not
Totally.
even called exercise, but you were exercising because you were going to get wood, or you were
Yeah.
fixing something, or doing something with your hands. You were more physically active. And the thing is, you look at the difference between a mind body. Like when my brain is worn out, I feel like crap. When my body is worn out, I feel great. Like if I go play in a basketball game and I'm exhausted, when we play soccer Sunday nights, we do 2 hours straight, no breaks, no nothing. Unless there's an injury, then we're like, oh, I guess we'll take this chance to get a sip of water. But we'll go 2 hours straight, no breaks, and you come home so tired, but you feel so great, and you could not be in a better mood. Like nothing could bother you. You're in the best mood. You feel great. You wake up the next day so sore. And I think people who exercise like us are like the only ones who like are in pain the next morning and like happy about it. We're like, this is awesome. I'm like, I got a hell of a workout in, because you know that it means that you put in work, and that your muscles are going to heal and be stronger and be able to deal with the workload better next time. And so it's just, to me, it's all these things are benefits you get from exercise and diet. And that's the other thing, right? Like the other myth is, you just exercise hard, you can kind of eat what you want. It's like, not really. Like there's consequences for that crap that you eat. I see people at the gym every morning, same people. There's a handful of people that are there before I get there and always there after I leave, and they put into work, and their bodies never change. And
of course,
I'm like, oh, it's not what you're doing in here, it's what you're doing out of here, and that's your problem. And and that's one, because it's way easier to just exercise hard. Some people love exercising but don't have the discipline to do the hard thing, and that's like, suppress your desires to eat whatever you want.
Yeah. And I mean, our standard American diet is, so designed for the hyper palatable, foods that are mostly not food. I mean, that's kind of my big thing. Like people always ask, like, what are and I mean, I've tried everything, but I really don't have like, a specific diet that I follow, but I really try to focus on real food. And I have to tell you, that's actually not so easy these days. Like to just actually eat food versus chemicals and, synthetics and, all the poisons that they're putting in everything, to really just mostly pick like preferably organic, but like real food choices. And that's really not such an easy thing to do these days. And that's really kind of my rule. It's like, no seed oils, mostly organic, and like food, not chemicals. That's
Well, you look at it, I forget who said it on my show, and I keep repeating it tonight, so I should give them credit. But or somebody, I don't know if it was a private. I'm starting to mix up private conversations with podcast conversations, but
I do it too. Yeah.
Somebody in my life that I talked to said something about, and it's funny because at first I'm like, that seems kind of difficult, and then I'm like, wait, that's not that difficult. I do it, and they're like, you shouldn't eat anything that has ingredients on it, and I'm like, good freaking point. I'm like, if it has like fruit. If I get an orange, it's just an orange. There's no ingredients. If I get a piece of meat, it's just steak or pork or whatever. If I, so it's like if it has ingredients on it, you should try to stay away from it. So I would tell people that. I'm like, listen, try to eat things like our ancestors, like things you could pick, things you could kill, things you could grow. I'm like, that's a good starting point. And if you look at all the, obviously, tribalistic diets, diets have become very tribalistic, where like it's become kind of cultish, where it's like, I'm the keto guy, I'm the paleo guy, I'm a this, I'm a that, this is the best diet. That's it. And their
identity is wrapped in their diet.
No, you're right. But there's a couple things that they all kind of have in common. That's like eliminate processed foods, eliminate sugars, so it's like, even if you're a vegan, like they'll tell you shouldn't be eating tons of artificial sugar, you shouldn't be eating processed foods, and so it's like, start there and take baby steps, because I think a lot of I see even with friends of mine who like, I'm going to try the keto diet again. What can I eat? I'm like, oh my God, I've had this conversation with you about 100 times. And it's like, it's like, this is what you should be eating, more or less is what you shouldn't be eating. But I'm like, and they're like, okay, I'm going to do, and I'm like, how about this? Just start taking baby steps, because I'm like, you try to change your whole life overnight and it doesn't work. I'm like, how about you, like, you cut out the sodas? How about you maybe try to cut out the bread? How about you, and then little by little, once that way of eating has been well adopted into your life, and you can you don't really look at it as a diet, you just look at it, this is the way I eat, then maybe start changing it again, maybe start introducing this or that, and that's kind of one of the problems with a lot of dieting, is that people just try to do it overnight.
Yes. So I've done a lot of nutritional counseling, and I've done, personal training with a lot of clients, and, of course, as a coach too, people would ask me, and that's what they always want. They want you to give them like a plan, something very like strict blueprint kind of thing. And they want it all overnight. They're like, I'm going to make this a radical change. And I'm like, no, I'm like you said, something really simple. Let's just cut out soda, do nothing else, cut out soda, and maybe do one extra walk a day, like around your block, and little things like that. I mean, for some people make a huge difference depending on where they're starting from. People underestimate how much that could actually do if you really did that. But that's just it. A lot of people, they want something overnight. This is why big pharma is such a great business model, right? Because they want a pill and they want it instantly and the instant gratification. But the reality is, like, little small changes over time really add up. And yeah, I think that's highly underestimated. But yeah, people should just start with something really simple, adopt that into their lifestyle, then add on something else, see what else you can take on. But
Yeah, you're right. And it's funny because everybody who comes to me for dietary advice, same thing. Like they don't want to do any thinking. They just want me to tell me what to eat. And I'm like, how about I tell you roughly what to eat? I'm like, yeah, I'm like, it's really not that hard. You tell them like, hey, if same thing. I usually one of the rules, because marketers are very good. Like keto,
yeah.
when I started doing keto, it wasn't a household name. You had to make everything from scratch. There were like keto products out there. I remember even when Primal Kitchen, Mark Sisson's company, came about, like I remember having to order stuff from his website, and like, I'm like, oh, cool. Now there's like dressings and things that are healthy to put on your food. But that was the other thing. Like that's why Mark Sisson was so intelligent, because he understood that, okay, you're taking a healthy salad per se, and you're putting a bunch of soybean oil on it, basically, with your dressing, and you're putting a bunch of unhealthy things on it. So he found like this hole in the market where it's like, well, you're eating good food, but you don't have any good sauces or dressings or ketchup or barbecue sauce or any of the things that complements food that is healthy. And so that worked out. But even like that little trick, I'm like, listen, look at don't just look at nutritional facts, because something might say keto, so it means it might be low on carbs or no carbs, but it might be just because they inserted a bunch of fiber in it, or it could be still full of like crappy ingredients. So I'm like, you have to look at the ingredients. People will now and look at something that's keto. Like my wife the other day was like, she's brought home some keto bread, and I'm like, and I looked at her and I'm like, look at the first ingredient on here. Look at the second ingredient on it. I'm like, it's all like cheap vegetable oil and just a ton, and it's just inserted with tons of just fiber just to bring the net carbs down. I'm like, you're better off just eating organic wheat bread.
Yeah, exactly. Sourdough, which has like, it eats up the gluten. So yeah.
So even something that is good, and this is why people give up on diets, because it seems confusing and overwhelming. Like, okay, wait, you're telling me to eat keto according to the nutritional facts, this is keto, but now you're telling me I shouldn't eat it. And I'm like, yeah, but it's weird because it's probably like both of us, we've been in this world for so long. It seems like common sense, but the average person like doesn't want to put that much effort in what they're eating, which is kind of mind-boggling, because I'm like, it literally will affect your mood, it will affect your sleep, it will affect your recovery, it will affect your mental and physical performance. It literally affects every aspect of your life. So if there's something that you should take some time to understand, it's what you're putting in your body.
I couldn't agree more. And that is so interesting that you say that, because to me, it's like so obvious, because you and I have been so steeped in this for so long. But I had that experience, I think, with all of my world. Like, I assume everybody knows what I know, and that I know very little, right? So everybody must know more. And I did a podcast the other day with James Lindsay and Jay Dyer, and I presented the topic, but we talked about transhumanism, and James, so I asked the question, and James backs up and he says, he's like, well, Courtenay, I think we should back up a little bit, because yes, I think between the three of us, we know this, but most people don't know what that is. Like, and I was like, oh, I thought that's like, and I realized, of course, he's right. But, I'm thinking, well, everybody, this is so thrown in our faces constantly. But it's the same thing with diet and nutrition. I mean, I have conversations with, even my mom, who is, super intelligent and, savvy, and, and things that because the marketing has been so strong. So she'd be like, well, I can't eat eggs because my cholesterol is high, and it's like, no, like that, that was literally, and we have evidence of this now, that it was literally a campaign, by the sugar industry to demonize fats so that, for the benefit of the sugar industries. So, we know that now. And even just like things like cholesterol, people are so misled because of all of these marketing campaigns. Cholesterol is actually, I mean, I won't go into the nuance and the science of it because that's actually kind of complicated. But, the Cliff Notes version is that they're the good guys that help, they take out the toxins, they clean out, they're like the carriers. And I think that, that's part of where the confusion comes, because people think when your cholesterol is super elevated, it's an indicator that, there's more toxins that it's cleaning out, but cholesterol itself is not the bad guy. So that's just one example, though. The marketing has been, people are still, I know people who are still stuck in what I call like the Snackwell marketing phase, it's like where they think that processed, packaged, fat-free foods are better than, the alternative, than like actual real foods like butter, which, is a natural kind of byproduct of animal meat. So, yeah.
And think about how many generations of people who are obese, have health issues, are all because of this misinformation.
I know, it's so sad. And I really think it's by design. And, now when I go into all the, the history of like, the big pharma, the big food industry, certainly learning so much more about our geopolitical context. And you realize that, as you said, food, it shapes everything. It's our mood, it's our recovery, it's our performance, our health in every facet. And so, there are people who are invested in us not being well. And I think that is why they've had such a stronghold on destroying the food industry and putting all of these chemicals and toxins and literal disinformation campaigns for marketing. Because if people who are sick and slow, obese, are dependent, they're much easier to control. They're dependent on big pharma. They're much more likely to need, medical intervention. And that's a society that is of people who are not sovereign, and they're much more malleable and much more controllable. And that is what the powers that shouldn't be want. So
It's funny because being into working out at such a young age, that was kind of the first couple things that made me really skeptical about experts or science or media, was just the cholesterol lie and all the nutritional lies that led to me uncovering, like, okay, like you can convince a whole public that sugar is something you shouldn't even pay attention to. Like, don't even bother worrying about how much sugar you're consuming, and create this food pyramid that's completely nonsense, and demonize fat. Cholesterol is a hormone, a necessary thing. I mean, when you have little kids, they need healthy fats, they need DHA, they need all these things. And it's like, and then you get older and they tell you, no, fat's bad, and use this stuff that's, you can't believe it's not butter and all this. My mother the other day, like, she was using like some type of like butter alternative. I'm like, and it's so hard, like you said, like they're being conditioned to believe for so long that it's bad for you, that she's like, oh, I'm just trying to cook healthier and not use as much butter. I'm like, no, this is worse for you. I'm like, what? I'm like, well, butter is not. And I try to convince my parents, because as foreigners from, being from Western Europe, Portugal, like butter and fatty meats, pork and chorizo, sausage, all this stuff, like this is all stuff that's a huge part of our diet. I'm like, look at people in Europe. I'm like, we eat tons of fat. I'm like, we eat fatty meat, we eat fatty sausage, we eat tons of cheese. I'm like, it's not the fat. I'm like, it's and there's a great documentary called Sugar Coated, and which goes into the whole history that you were talking about. And similar with I've had Dr. Robert Lusting on, even though I disagree with him on vaccines, and we disagreed a little bit about vaccines a little bit, but he's done great work in regards to the sugar industry. He had that viral video called The Bitter Truth, which is really good. But he and I believe he was also in the documentary Sugar Coated. But I mean, there's still people today that it's like you cannot convince them otherwise. They've been conditioned to believe this, and it's so hard to get them to realize, like, no, you've been lied to, and if what they're set to, if the old nutritional information was true, everybody doing keto would be dead right now.
Right. Right. Absolutely. No, it is really hard. The conditioning is so incredibly ingrained. And when you look at Europe, although things are changing in Europe, but they're much healthier than we are here. And it if the marketing were accurate, then that would not be true. So
Well,
yeah,
they move more too. That's the other thing. Like I think the
they
mental
have.
stress of modern life is something we haven't really adapted to, but the
Yeah.
physical stress has been a part of our, lives forever, and it's rewarding and we feel good
Yeah.
and accomplishing something like that. But even like the DSM, I remember going down the rabbit hole of the DSM and how non scientific it is. I'm like, wait, you have a
We're
chemical.
on DSM-5, and they've changed each iteration of the DSM. This is like a pet peeve of mine, but each iteration of the DSM has been changed. They changed the terminology and what the definitions of that terminology are, and they're mostly done for legal purposes. To for like, because you can plea insanity in court cases, and so when you change these the categories and the terminology of things, you have a different legal justification, and it drives me bonkers. I mean, if you look at the DSM-1 and you look at DSM-5, I mean, they're like unrecognizable from each other.
Have
Sorry,
you
go on.
watched? No, no, it's okay. Have you watched? No, you should do more talking because people are sick of hearing me talk. But have you watched the documentary? I think it's "Making a Killing: The History of some." How I forget how it's phrased, but I think it's called "Making a Killing." But it goes in through the into the whole history of it. And one thing people will learn is like they call things chemical imbalances, but they don't test anybody to see which chemicals imbalance, how imbalanced it is.
No.
So you become a guinea pig of try this cocktail, you try this that cocktail, and then keep going. And if this doesn't work, up the dose of this, lower the dose of that. It's like there's no science behind it at all. And there's plenty of scientific evidence that exercise can help with depression, anxiety. I just feel like we are kind of there as a society, like so many of us just want that easy pill. Like it's easier than exercising. It's easier. It's like, what's a diet loss pill? Oh yeah, I want that diet loss pill. Like people will contact me like, hey, have you heard about this supplement? I heard it increases your metabolism. You can lose. And I'm like, have you heard of diet and exercise? Because I'm like, you look at pictures of people from like the 60s and 70s. I'm like, everybody's fit. Like it's hard to find one fat person in the group. They've done this where they've analyzed like old portraits of pictures of people in public, and it's hard to find somebody who's overweight. And it's like now it's hard to find the skinny person in the group. It's like, so it obviously diet and exercise works. It's what we've been doing forever, and to stay in shape. I will say times have changed in regards to like our quality of food is probably much worse now than it was.
Yes,
So I'm sure that's a contributor to
it
some,
is.
you know.
It's definitely a factor. Like our soil has like significantly less nutrients and minerals in it than it did 100 years ago. So it's increasingly deteriorating. That's definitely a factor. And they are putting, a lot of our food is not, as I was saying, not real food. They're putting chemicals in. There's lots of microplastics in our food. Certainly we talked about seed oils, which apparently they're so inflammatory and they apparently stay in your body for over 2 years. But then there's also canola oil, which is not quite the same thing, but that is a derivative of World War II artillery grease that they had such an abundance of, and it was so cheap that they decided that should be edible. No, I'm sorry, humans are not meant to ingest artillery grease. And then you brought up vaccines, but that's actually a component as well, because they're using foods in the cocktail that they inject into, and I'm not even talking about the current like mRNA whatever. I'm talking about what people think is traditional vaccines, although it's arguable that even those are really vaccines, but that's a whole nother rabbit hole. But they use food ingredients, and our digestive systems are incredible, and they're designed to break down these things, and I call us detox machines. The human body is really amazing. However, it's not designed to process when it's going into the bloodstream. And so now you're getting things like, egg and peanut and chicken, and they're being injected into your bloodstream when you're an infant or a young child. And then we wonder why we have, like a 200% increase in peanut allergy and egg allergy. Well, maybe it's because that was a trauma, you've been injected with this food into your bloodstream, and now your body doesn't know how to process it because it has a trauma response, being remembering that instance when it had to try and detox from these, what should be foods being injected into our bloodstream. But I think that affects, our metabolic processes as well, because trauma is so, there's a book, The Body Keeps the Score, and our bodies really do store trauma in our cells. So I think it's all related. But yeah, sorry, long rant again. But
No, that's all really good stuff. You're right. It is all related. I've had Dr. Rupert Sheldrake on here, and his whole theory on what is it called? Resonance. I forget what it's called, but it's basically this idea that our consciousness some way or in some way is all connected. And they
yes, the resonance theory. Yeah, I heard that one. That was fascinating. Yeah.
Rupert's very fascinating, and it's funny because he's a real scientist from the UK, and he's demonized just because people think that it's like seems supernatural or whatever. It's like, listen, like the most unscientific thing you can say is that the science is settled. Science is never settled.
That's the first rule of science, that science isn't settled. And what's interesting is it's interesting that anybody would debunk resonance theory, because we know it from women's menstrual cycles, right? That's resonance theory, is the theory behind it. So I don't know if you're familiar, but like women tend to sync up if they spend a lot of time together. Their cycles tend to start to sync up together. And there's a lot of factors at play, but one of them that they, they've kind of, again, I can't say proven, nothing's proven in science. That's the first rule of science. But, that is one of the foremost theories, is that it is a resonance that occurs.
Yeah, and he has this idea that everything has a memory, right? And that's the thing. So this is what I love about, because I can see that we're very similar in regards to, we have curiosities that lead us in many different directions.
Yeah.
The thing about and the interesting thing is, right, like you read something that's very fascinating, and you're like, okay, like I don't know why this is so important or fascinating, but I'm gonna like leave this over here, and it's gonna be like a little dot, and then you're gonna forget another dot, and then you start connecting them eventually.
Yes.
And that's I think that's why we love going down different rabbit holes, because it's, I always use the metaphor, or I say this all the time about my life journey, is like to gather as many pieces to the puzzle as possible, and life's just this endless amounts of pieces, and I might not gather all of them, but I'm going to gather as many as possible, and hope that I gathered enough at the end of my journey for the image to kind of make a little bit more sense. And so like a lot of times you gather something and you're like, I don't know what this is, but I know it's a puzzle piece, and I'm going to hold on to it. And then you find the one that kind of connects with it. And that's kind of with Rupert Sheldrake, because I had him on quite a long time ago. And then you go into all these other rabbit holes, like you hear about, there's an article called it's about epigenetics and inheriting father spheres, and it's about the study where they would spray this synthetic scent, a scent that these mice never would have been exposed to in the natural world, and they would shock them. And so naturally, every time they would smell the scent, they would have this panic reaction where they would like get scared. And for 2 generations after, never being shocked, every time they would spray that scent, their children and their children's children would have the same panic reaction. So what they figured out was that the trauma of that scent was inherited, so which makes you think again, like, okay, is there some type of consciousness that's connecting us all? Is there something that, with Rupert Sheldrake, his famous study was the one where he had these mice learn this maze, and different mice in a different location would learn the exact same maze faster.
Wow.
And it would continue. So and then they would have other mice, never, these mice never had any interaction whatsoever, never exposed to this maze ever, would learn it faster, and it would continue. So this idea of like there's this consciousness that's connecting us, and that we can, think about it. How would you, if we were just born and we didn't we're little kids, like try explaining like radio waves, right? Like it would be like, it would seem supernatural if we didn't grow up in a world where there's radio. You'd be like, okay, there's stuff in the air, you don't see it, but you can connect to it using this device. You'd be like, well, that's might be what's going on with consciousness, if there's some way of connecting. And then I get really, like, I've had Dr. Tom Cowan on a few times, and I had him on the first time I had him on was like a long time ago before he was a household name, because he kind of became a household name during the COVID lockdown.
Yeah.
But I was really fascinated with just his theory on just about everything. Like he turned everything upside down. And
Really?
yeah, he's like one of the most fascinating guys. And Dr. Jessica Rose, who's a regular on my show, I had her on. I'm like, hey, will you come on next time Dr. Tom Collins on? And that way, if he says something that I'm too dumb to understand, you can kind of expand on it, because I'm like, sometimes I want to do justice to what he's saying, and if he says something that doesn't make sense, or I want him to be pushed a little bit, because I think he's very capable of being pushed and going into detail, but I'm not capable of knowing when to do that. So
Right.
Dr. Jessica Rose came on with me, and it was just amazing conversation. We got into water, and he has this really fascinating just perspective on water. And again, could be one of those things that we haven't discovered what exactly water is or how it works. I mean, we know it's like basically makes up everything, our muscles, our bodies, or it's in everything. And it was funny because it seems like it's silly. Like one thing he talked about was looking at water, and it would, counting on your mood or the music you're playing, would change the way it would crystal.
Yeah, Emoto, he's a Japanese scientist, did a whole study on it, and like different words will impact the actual molecular shape of water. Yeah.
Yeah, what is that? Like, we don't know. Like, it's like
We don't.
and it's like it just sits there. Like to me, it's like something that everybody should be discussing, because it could completely drastically change what we think we understand. And yet it's just like, okay, it's like, that doesn't make you skeptical of like the way we look at the world. Like, that doesn't make you think like, okay, we're nowhere near the finish line. I remember she's the host of Talk Nerdy, and she used to be on TYT back in the day, Kara Santa Maria, and really like her. I mean, she was one of the my first bigger guests, I believe, when I started the podcast. And but we had this conversation, and I could not disagree with her more. Like she said, well, this is what I couldn't disagree with her more on. And there's just a lot of things I probably disagree with her about, but like specifically this idea, because I think at the end of the conversation, I brought up the idea of, because she's a very scientific person and very anti-supernatural, very like
materialist.
materialist, and basically she doesn't realize it, but she left one religion, because I think she was raised very religious, and she joined another religion,
Scientism.
scientism and atheism. And I'm not religious, but I understand that, like, you just left one group to join another. Like, you're not you're not this neutral thinking thing. So I brought up to her, I'm like, do you think like 100 years from now or 200 years from now, we're going to look at the way we look at the world now, and there's going to be all these discoveries where like, wow, they were monkeys, they didn't understand the world at all, the same way we look at our ancestors, who would call everything that they didn't understand a god, right? Like, they didn't know what thunder was, so they called it a god that was angry. Or we didn't understand the waves in the ocean, so they'd be like, oh, it's this supernatural god that was doing whatever. And I'm like, do you think we're going to look at it? And she's like, no. She's like, I think we have a really good understanding of the world. And she's like, obviously we haven't discovered everything, and I'm like, really? I'm like, don't you think every generation thinks they're the ones who are super close to the finish line of understanding the world? Like,
right.
It was very, I don't know if it was naive or arrogant or whatever, but I'm just like,
it's myopic. I think that's what it is. It's, you're so focused on your view, and it's very linear, so you don't see the bigger scope. Yeah.
Well, that, and I think it's one of those things where their whole worldview is based on, like, we think we understand the world. Like, we think
it's a little grandiose. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like, and the truth is, you might not, like, this is what we think, and like you said, one thing that you said that is so true. Like, you can't prove anything. You can, like, I can say that this pen falls because of gravity, and this is what we think gravity is.
Yeah.
There's no way of proving for sure that gravity exists, and that's what's pulling a object to the ground. So it's all just theories on top of theories on top of theories. Just about nothing is provable. So that's why I love going down different rabbit holes. When something seems too crazy to believe, I want to look into it, because I'm like, okay, there might be something there, and a lot of times there is. Like, okay, flat earthers, I know they get a lot of crap, but it is one of those things where like I've learned some stuff
Mhm.
listening to flat earthers, their arguments,
Mm.
and they're pretty accurate with their critiques of science and experts. And I'm like, I agree with you guys and all that. I mean, Scientology, same thing. Like
Mhm.
they're they're not a fan of the DSM at all and any prescription drugs for mental health or anything like that. And I'm like,
Mm.
I agree with your critique of that, and
Yeah.
I and
Well,
it,
even a broken clock is right twice a day, so it's that's one of my pet peeves also is just people who we've gotten so I think it's because critical thinking is so lost and because people have been spoon-fed narratives and meta narratives for so long that they actually can't adjudicate nuances. And so everybody's, caught in this binary logic where it's black, it's white. And, you can disagree with the whole of a theory and still recognize that there are some truths in their arguments. That is actually possible. You may very much disagree with one person and a lot of what they say. That doesn't mean everything they say is wrong. And vice versa. You may have tremendous respect for someone and for the material they put forth. And sometimes you're going to say, oh, well, actually, some of that was wrong because it's going to be. We're human, we're fallible, and it's not black and white. But yeah, people do that. So
as somebody who has a show or had a show, because I believe it got banned off YouTube, which the whim
I
show,
yeah.
which
Yeah, my whole channel got taken down, wiped out. Yeah, and so they're still holding Wim hostage. I say hostage because I had my Wim stuff on my Courtenay Turner channel, which was also where my podcast was. But then I also had a separate Wim channel, and somehow they've held that I can't like take it down. I can't access it because even though it was a separate email, it just keeps rerouting to the same email that had the original. That's just how I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know how. I've emailed them. I've clearly gotten no response. So, but yes, they nuked me. I kind of knew it was going to happen. I mean, it was a matter of time, but
it's weird because I mean, I never listened to that show, but it didn't sound controversial at all. And it's the name. Have you are you also a fan of Wim Hof? Is that one of the reasons that inspired the names? I'm a huge fan.
I am a fan of Wim Hof, but no. So Wim was not controversial at all. It's just because of my Courtenay Turner podcast. It just happened to be so when I had some of those episodes on the Courtenay, it wasn't on the Courtenay Turner podcast, but it was on that channel. Those obviously got taken down, and I expected that because that's part of Courtenay Turner channel. But the other one, it's just some sort of, and it may really be an AI kind of glitch where it just keeps rerouting me back to they won't let me look at it separately, like the separate channel.
So
But
shows they've kind of figured out that they're both shows are by the same host, so
yes,
you
I
can't.
think that's exactly what it is. So, but that one was not controversial. It was Wim from What is Movement, and I actually had to put out like What is Movement as a kind of the tagline because Wim itself would have like copyright trademark issues, and I do trademark it. But no, the way I came up with it was that I wanted something that sounded like whimsical. I wanted it to have a feel of, I think when you put like one of my, messages is that it's really about movement and it's not about training or exercise or, a fitness routine, because I think that people's perspective around that gets very rigid and very, it's just, yeah, it's a very rigid kind of a mindset shift that happens when people think of, I've got to go work out today, or I've got to go train today. But movement is something that all human beings, my premise is that all human beings are designed to move. The ways in which we do are our unique creative expression. And so I really wanted people to tap into what does movement mean to them and how do they embrace it? What is their movement style? And that can shift over time. But as an actress, when I would do character study, one of the things that I would study is their physical carriage. I'm visually impaired, so I don't always recognize people's faces when I see them far away, but I often recognize the way they walk, the way they hold their heads, the way they, their hand movements. I can recognize those things because that's such a huge part of who we are, is our physicality. So yeah.
I think you're just more in touch with that too, because I think a lot of our the way we're observing something has to do with those little social cues and
Mhm.
little things that you think, aren't having a huge effect on the way you perceive something, but it is, and with kids, I think I remember I had this psychology or the professor of psychology at Notre Dame on. She's very fascinating, and she does a
Mhm.
lot of work about kids and
Mhm.
childhood and parenting. And I think it was her that told me that at a young age, like basically until language is kind of developed, like that's their social cues are like off the charts because their only way of communication. So it's similar to like what you're saying. When you lack one skill, a linguistic skill, your only
Mhm.
way of understanding what's going on around you or how somebody feels is all those little things.
Totally.
And probably as we get older, and we depend on language a little more and probably less on those things. But that's one thing that I would tell parents. I would tell parents that, and I'm like, listen, so that means when you and the wife are fighting and you think the kid's not picking up on it, or when you're having friction and you think like, oh, they're not going to know, you can hide it from them. You're not. They're going to
No,
sense
they
it.
know.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like all of 2020 and 2021 and most of probably 2022. There was this, you could almost, and some of it's kind of been uplifted because of the country and the world kind of opening up and putting the whole COVID thing a little bit behind us. But not to say that there's not still tons of fights going on all over the place in the world in regards to like just vaccine mandates and people who are injured. But for the general public, I think they kind of feel like it took a backseat to many other topics. And you kind of felt like this anxiety and just infighting and friction was like uplifted. And
Mhm.
during the COVID lockdown, especially 2020 and 2021, I mean, you go to a grocery store, you go to the gym, you go anywhere, and you felt like there was just friction and negative energy everywhere. I mean, nothing was fun. There's nowhere where you could go. Like this tension was just like it was. That's why I say like it's probably the greatest event in human history because it's the only event that's affected every human on Earth at the same time.
Yeah.
And it's like you know it to me like it's good. I'm glad that it's taken a back seat because I think a lot of people who were fighting or not getting along are now finding it easier to get along with people because they weren't even aware of all the extra tension that was put on them, and that's why they were looking at people like their enemy instead of their neighbor who they might disagree with, and so that's and that goes into exercise and meditation, all the things that were taken away from us, and community. People couldn't go to the church. I mean, I hated going to church growing up, but like I get people who enjoy it and have a need
Yeah.
for it, and you shouldn't take that away from them. So
No.
I think physically taking away the gyms, like they just saw it as like, oh, okay, it's a physical thing we're taking away from people. It's like, no, man, you're taking away people's ability to deal with all this mental uncertainty and anxiety.
And so this was really fascinating, I think, about COVID because it woke up people. I mean, I think, that's the silver lining. It woke up so many people, but it particularly, I've noticed, woke a lot of people up in the health fitness space who otherwise were either not political or were actually, much more mainstream. A lot of them were on the left, like it was really interesting to watch them though. And it was because of the hypocrisy that they just couldn't wrap their heads around. It was like, wait, you're going to close gyms. We have a health crisis, but gyms are closed. They're not essential, but donut shops and liquor shops, those are essential businesses. Those should stay open. I remember having this conversation with my mom about the dentist. Like I couldn't go to the dentist for, I don't know, however long. And she said, so wait, why? And I said, well, they're not essential apparently. And I said, but don't worry. I think the logic is that, I will have spent so much time in the essential businesses, which are the liquor shops and the donut shops. So my teeth will be so rotted and I will be so drunk that I won't notice that I need to go to the dentist. I think that's the plan, but it's ludicrous. I mean, you can only laugh because it's so absurd. But I do think the blessing was that a lot of people, especially in that space, realize that this makes no sense, and they, people who are health oriented, and I don't mean necessarily pharmaceutically oriented. That's a very different thing to me. But people who are really health oriented, know that Yeah, the gym has so much, it's all encompassing, and you don't have to belong to a gym, to be physically healthy or even fit. But, it encompasses so much more than just, space to go and get a workout. It's a mind, body. And for a lot of people, it was a social outlet. And that was one of the things that I realized when I was, let go from both of the gyms that I was coaching at. I realized that so much of my, social interaction was, coaching all day long, my training and my coaching. You're around people constantly. And even if it wasn't super deep, conversations, there's still that face to face. And that's very powerful. So to take that away from people is devastating.
And I've never been a personal trainer, but being a gym rat, I'm constantly around people that are being trained, and it seems like a lot of what they enjoy from the personal training is having that social interaction, having somebody who they can talk to. Like they look forward to seeing each other and chatting and catching up on stuff. And that's such a crucial part of our health that was taken away from people too. I mean, this idea that you couldn't get together on holidays. If you're walking down the sidewalk, like people would jump off the sidewalk. You did not get, I mean, it was like so unnatural. And the bad part about all this anxiety and stress kind of being uplifted and us being able to move on from it a little bit is that the people responsible for the trauma that I'm sure many people have and are still dealing with, the people who lost their businesses, the children who had parents who were freaking out. I mean, I saw it with my kids, like, I'd be somewhere where there's other kids, and if other kids came near us, their parents would be yelling at them like, put your mask up, like, I'm like, what are you doing to that kid? You're literally scaring them about everything. I mean, this kind of goes into if down to more conspiratorial rabbit holes of like, you are constantly trying to demonize humans and like make humans be the enemy of the world. Like, so you look at like depopulation, you look at the environmental movement, it's all about like humans are bad, we're only doing bad in the world, we're bad. Like, it's almost like it's baby steps in the direction of, now let's just sit down in a chair, have nutrition pumped into us, and we could just live in some virtual reality or
Wally's world, right? Wally. Yeah, well, I actually think that it is absolutely a design. And when you look at the Club of Rome, so when you talk about the environmental movement, right, the Club of Rome, when they were first putting out their limits of growth paper, they knew that, it was a bunch of BS, and they knew that people were not going to get on board. And they actually admitted to this. They said the only way that we are going to get people to rally behind this ludicrous concept is if we create a common enemy that everybody will be able to get behind. And so what did they come up with? They literally said this, and they admit to this. They decided that the enemy of man was man. The enemy of humanity was man. So, well, the carbon they want to reduce is man, right? So, I mean, but they literally admit this, and they say this, that man is the enemy of humanity. So we are our biggest thing that we have to overcome. And that's why they believe in population reduction. And that's why they, have put forth all of these really asinine ideas that, will lead to the carbon tax and the carbon credits and, the ESGs. But it's just a way to rally us all behind this. But they do admit that. They say that it's, it's the enemy of humanity is man. So
that's the part that's so funny, is how many people will dismiss what we're talking about. And yet it's like, oh, the Great Reset is a conspiracy theory. I'm like, or a book written by the guy responsible for it. I'm like,
I mean, how many of his books? The Great Reset, the Great Narrative. I mean, the Fourth Industrial Revolution. They lay it out, and he's not exactly Mr. Klausy. He's not exactly like new to this, because he was groomed. He was groomed by Kissinger and Galbraith and Herman Kahn, right? And he was discovered through a CIA-funded program at Harvard that was helmed by Henry Kissinger. They brought him over to Europe to start the European Council, and then a year later, helmed the World Economic Forum. This is not new. He's just the new figurehead. He was, the head of the Bilderberg Group. You go back and you look at his history. You look at his father. His father was one of the heads of the Eichler-Weiss company, very instrumental in the in World War II. He was involved in weaponry assistant for nuclear power in Africa. That this is Klaus Schwab. And so when you start digging through their history, I mean, these plans have been laid out for so long. Like Lord Birkenhead was talking about a lot of these plans over a year ago because he was a lord. He was part of the Royal Society. Bertrand Russell was talking about these things about 100 years ago. And if you read the white papers going back this past several, half a century or more, that they're not shy about their plans. And now we have Klaus Schwab, who people think is the Great Reset is a conspiracy theory, but meanwhile, he literally laid it out. It's like maybe we should take them for the. So I was telling you, I just had Dr. James Lindsay on. He said that his superpower is that he reads these things and then he believes them. I'm like, I think that's what we should be doing. Maybe believe that these people are actually saying what they mean, and then maybe we would have less people asleep at the wheel.
Well, that's the thing that's fascinating. It's like, why is it so hard to believe that there's people who want to control other people? That's been happening since the beginning of time. There's
right.
The
right.
reason why they created monarchies, the reason why Genghis Khan, went around killing people, the reason why there's been great battles and wars and conquering other people is because that's in our nature. There's always going to be. So to think that now we live in some world where there's not going to be some elite who think that they should be deciding what's best for the world and they should be the one influencing and molding the future of humanity, like it's just naive. Like it's so naive. Like just learn history. And it's like, but it's always weird because people always act like that was then and now things are different. If you discover
we're so evolved.
Yeah. Like you talk about Operation Paperclip or MK Ultra, people are always like, yeah, JFK assassination. People are like, yeah, I'm all on board. And then you talk about anything like that today, they're like, no. And I'm like, why do you think it could happen then and not now? Like what, it's just, there's something about historically, like when you're reading in a book and it happened a long time ago before, we were born, it's easier to digest. But if it's happening in our lifetime, I'm like, we just had the Michigan politician who was, trying to get kidnapped and assassinated by like the FBI. Like, I'm like, this stuff is, or CIA or whatever it was. And it's like, this stuff,
they work together anyway, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They're one and the same. That the CIA actually shouldn't be doing anything in United States. They're supposed to be intel, and so the fact that they're everywhere in every operation in the U.S. just tells you how much of their labels and their scope of work is just BS. But yeah. So
I always say, I don't know if you've heard this, but they tried to recruit me when I was 7, and I always say my soul was spared. My parents said no. Yeah. But yeah, they're supposed to be, doing foreign intel, not weaponizing against the people.
Yeah, and it's just, and same thing with like political assassinations. There was that that advisor to the Clintons who they found hung himself like in some random place and hung himself and shot himself in the chest. Apparently, he could do both at the same time, which is pretty fascinating. But he apparently did both. And like everyone just called it a suicide, and it's like, and it's like, wait, this guy's linked to.
It's kind of like, well, a plane took down 3 buildings, even though it never hit one building. Even according to the main narrative, it never even hit the other building. But we're supposed to believe that,
yeah. But yet, if we talk about Saudi Arabia or Russia or somebody else, and we talk about political assassinations, nobody will ever doubt. Like if I said, hey, some guy, who was planning on running against Putin was found murdered or was an advisor for whoever, and you'd be like, yeah, that's believable. And then you say it happens in your country and you're like, no, that's a conspiracy theory. The Clinton body count's not real. I'm like, listen, how many coincidences do you need before you're like, okay, maybe some of this is highlighted?
Not a coincidence.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, some of it, I'm sure, like when we're looking for dots to connect, sometimes we probably might think that, okay, maybe
if you have a hammer, there's a nail everywhere. Sure. Yeah.
But when there's that many, like they can't all be just coincidental. Like some of them have to be, and again, we know this stuff happens. Well, we know this stuff happens in our country because I'm one of the most famous political assassinations of all time was in our country, JFK. And so why do we think it doesn't happen now? It's same thing with, like, I remember I had years ago, I had Nick Bryan on, who wrote the Franklin Scandal book. And
Oh yeah.
and we brought up, this was before Jeffrey Epstein was a household name, and he brings up Jeffrey Epstein, and we talked about how like everybody kind of in the alternative media knows this guy's
Mhm.
linked to the Clintons and this and that, people in Hollywood, people in Wall Street, everywhere. And it's like it's like, how is this guy not a household name? And then he becomes a household name, and I'm like, wow. I'm like, people know who Jeffrey Epstein is. I'm like, this is crazy. Like people actually know this guy, and everybody's kind of admitting that he's linked to all these high ranked people, and he's linked to child trafficking and all this stuff. And I'm like, this is gonna red pill the whole world. And next thing you know, like you talk about child trafficking now, and they're like, oh, isn't that QAnon stuff? I'm like, literally, they use QAnon as a way to dismiss it. I think that's one
Yep.
of the reasons why they connected child trafficking to QAnon so much, because it's like, oh, now it's a Q. I'm like, dude, there was that ABC journalist reporter who on a hot mic said, we had all this information, we did all this reporting to go public with the Epstein story, and it got squashed. It was
Yep.
whatever her name was, Anna something, whoever it was. But
Oh,
um
I know.
yeah,
I
and
remember him.
it's just like, like, how much more evidence do you need to, like, to me, the media and the politicians are like a woman who's in an abusive relationship, and it's like, well, he told me he's not going to hit me again, he loves me, it's like they keep lying to you.
Yeah.
How many times are you gonna keep getting hit before you're like, no, maybe I shouldn't trust this guy? It's like the media, it's like you can get lied to over and over again, and yet they lie to you the next time, and you still consider them innocent until proven guilty, instead of guilty until proven innocent.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think it's interesting when you're talking about people not being able to accept that, it would happen now in this time period or in this country. And I think a lot of that is it's just kind of like a cognitive dissonance. This is self-preservation, because it's too hard to look at that kind of a cold reality and see it now. You can be, when you're removed from it, like, oh, that was in the past. I think that's easier for people to accept because they have a little bit of distance from it, and so they feel safer. Whereas, if that's like something that's happening now in this time period, like, that's scary. That means I'm in danger. And I think it's a self-protective kind of mechanism. But
That's a really good point, and I think you're right, because and a lot of times, having some distance from the event, like, you can see people slowly start accepting it more and more. People don't realize that as a hot topic as COVID was, in regards to, like, nobody could talk about it with each other without somebody getting an argument. 9/11 was like that too. In
oh
it,
yeah.
you could not question 9/11 without people losing their mind, and they felt like you were anti-America, you were anti, being patriotic, you were, how dare you? And as time went by, you could see people start becoming much more skeptical of the events, much more willing to have, because I think when you look at those images and those videos, like, it still gives me goosebumps seeing the people like jump out of the building and all this stuff, and it just,
I was there. Yeah, totally.
oh, you were there? Oh,
Well, I was in New York, and I had friends who worked in the buildings and who escaped. Yeah. I had one friend actually who worked in the building. It was so funny because I was on my way to work when I got, the phone calls like, don't go to work, don't go to work. And like, the tower just blew up. But a friend of mine called me, and she was like, she's always late, perpetually late for everything. And she was late for work, and she called me. She said, Courtenay, I'm late for work, but there's smoke coming out of the subway. So I'm not sure if I should go in it. And I was like, don't go. I was like, your building just came down anyway. I'm pretty sure you're not going to work today. I was like, you can come over. Yeah. So, I mean, we watched it from the screen, but but I had another friend who was working there, and she lived like right behind me. I was in Midtown, and she had a pair of sneakers that she kept under her desk. She said she was an iBanker, and she like never made it to the gym, but she's like, I'll keep some sneakers here just in case maybe at 2 a.m. when I'm sleeping in the office, I can like go to the gym. And she said the only time she ever used the sneakers was to run from the towers up to 54th Street. Yeah.
that is wild. That is so wild. Yeah, and it's funny because so many first responders talked about hearing explosions. I mean, there's so many like conflicting stories. I'm like, even if you don't go down any conspiratorial rabbit holes, I'm like, just listen to what people were saying. I mean, there's a video of
Yeah.
Trump talking about it. I think he was on Fox News or somewhere where he was talking about, he's like, I've been to a lot of, construction meetings. He's like, I know a little bit about construction and how buildings are built. He's like, those buildings should not come down like that. That should, that seems, and then there's a documentary from of the making of the buildings that circulated, and people could see the architects and engineers talk about how it could easily handle, a crash from the whatever was the biggest commercial plane at the time. And so it's like, how much more evidence what was that? Was it 9/11 that like kind of started your red pilling or the process?
So, it wasn't at all. I'm so ashamed to say. And I actually just recently had Richard Gage on, and we did like a parallel of like the COVID psyop and the 9/11 psyop. So I was not red pilled by 9/11 because my dad was very influential in like my thought processes and my political awareness growing up. And he kept I actually was dating a guy at the time who kept telling me, 9/11 was an inside job, and like sending me all these documentaries. And I started to, kind of question it. And my dad's like, that's crazy. That's, the boomers have a really hard time with this. I hate to pick on them, but my mom, I've been really trying to get her on board, like, just planting little seeds. And I think she's starting to come on board with the 9/11 realities, but they have a really, really hard time with it. So it really wasn't. I feel like I was always very politically I started board for school choice when I was in 6th grade. So, I've always been kind of involved and aware of politics and, active to some degree. But I think it was the podcast that red pilled me. It wasn't even COVID. It was like, I think I started the podcast coming from a very naive perspective that, if we just got the right people in office, like we could fight this thing, I thought I think I had a lot more hope in politics itself. And now I really, don't have that perspective at all anymore. I realize this is much more of a geopolitical, spiritual kind of battle. But yeah, I think it was really doing the podcast and going deeper into the geopolitics. And that kind of really shaped, but I don't think I was ever, I wouldn't say I was like asleep, but I was probably much more of a true conservative, like political, ideology. Whereas I wouldn't say that. I definitely still have some conservative, beliefs. And I definitely resonate with a lot of like, the anti-federalists would be kind of, of the foundings of this country. But I definitely understand. I have a much broader scope of what's at play now than I think I did back then. What was it for you?
Well, mine, and we talked about it a little bit in the beginning of the conversation about how
Yeah.
little things became like these little pieces to the puzzle. And a little bit was the nutritional thing was,
Yeah.
I used to go to the doctors with my parents to translate for them. And because they still barely speak any English. We live in like a
Right.
Portuguese community, so they're not really forced to have to speak English. So, and they watch
Yeah.
Portuguese TV. They go to the Portuguese butcher shop. So it's like they never really are forced to that. So I would go translate for them. And I remember my dad having like the highest cholesterol ever. Like I thought it was his credit score, and the number was so high. And the doctor would tell me like every time he'd go visit there, he's like, I have this many hundreds of patients. He's like, your dad has the highest cholesterol of them all. And I'm like, and I would always go home arguing with my father, like, dude, you're going to have a heart attack. You're going to die. You're going to die.
Yeah.
Like this doctor's, I'm like, this is unheard of. I'm like, your number is so high. And then he's like, oh, I'm fine. I'll be fine. And every year, right, like we would be like the same argument, same thing, or every whatever checkup, anytime I have to go. And after a while, I'm like, the doctor told me he was going to be dead like years ago. I'm like, he's healthy as a horse. I'm like, he literally does not sit still. He works construction all day, comes home, works on his farm, is always in a great mood, has a glass of wine with dinner every night, makes wine, like, just everything he does is physical and always busy. And, at the time I still lived at home. If we had family members over and we stayed up drinking, he'd be up before me the next morning, and I'm like, I'm really getting skeptical of this cholesterol thing. And so, and then that kind of was the first thing that I'm like, and then when I got into exercising, I got really into vitamins and eating healthy. And I started realizing how like the government was demonizing a lot of vitamins, saying, oh, this doesn't cure anything. You can't say it cures anything. And I'm like, well, that's weird, because I'm like, I just met somebody who said they cured this using that, which is a natural herb or vitamin, but yet you can't put it on a label. So like, that's where like my journey really did start off with like diet and nutrition first. And then I remember watching like Loose Change, which is awesome. That like Jason Burmison, is now,
he's awesome.
Yeah, he considered a friend. And the Zeitgeist movie. Zeitgeist movie was really eye-opening. And then 9/11, A Road to Tyranny, and by Alex Jones. So there was like a lot of different things that were just like completely just opened my eyes to like the way the world worked. And then next thing you know, you're just questioning everything. And there's nothing that and then I got into different, like I was always really into philosophy, which I think also contribute a little bit, because I idea of like constantly questioning things. I
was a philosophy major, so I think that laid the huge, and I did an independent study in high school. I actually, in my sophomore year of high school, I wrote a paper on the trial of Socrates that my ninth grade history teacher ended up publishing. I did like my ninth grade term paper on the pre-Socratic philosophers' primordial search for transcendence. So I've been like really steeped in philosophy from a very, very young age, like even elementary school. And I think that shaped so much of what I'm doing now with the podcast. I think that I was much more open to, I agree with you. Like I asked questions about everything. I was the why kid. And I think that having that philosophical background has led me to a much deeper understanding of the ideology and the philosophies that have been used as instruments. I don't think I would have had a full concept of all of that. Otherwise it would have been like new information for me, but because I had that foundation, I think that was really helpful.
What were some of the philosophers that you found intriguing that you got into, or any modern philosophers you like, or what was the philosophers that you would say are the most influential in your way of thinking?
So interesting. I don't know that who was and who is the same, because I think it's changed over time quite a bit. But certainly growing up, and even now, the pre-Socratic philosophers and the ancient Greeks are fascinating to me. And I think they've shaped so much of the world and the perspective of the world. Certainly Plato and Aristotle. I think there's problems with both of them. But Aristotle's virtues, I think, if were implemented today, could kind of be the antidote to everything that's wrong today. Everything might be a broad statement, but to a lot of the problems we see today, if people reverted to a time where they were aspiring towards virtues, I think that we could see a lot of problems reversed. So definitely, I wrote my college thesis on the existential philosophers. I wrote it on existential authenticity. And I have a very different perspective on my thesis that I wrote back then than I do now. My thesis was essentially that authenticity is it's kind of like an asymptote. You never, that's a mathematical term, but like you never actually achieve it. You get closer and closer, but you're always in, and it makes sense because it is kind of a derivative of a lot of the kind of like Marxist becoming type philosophy. And I saw it differently. I saw it as much more kind of empowering, it's which again, is interesting because that is how Gnosticism is put forth, right? As a man is the controller and he's the mini God. And so, but I still think there's a lot of merit in, a lot of the thought processes of certainly like Nietzsche. I think Nietzsche was bastardized quite a bit. I think he's very misinterpreted. And that doesn't mean I agree with everything he says, but I think Nietzsche is very profound and was very prophetic in a lot of ways. And a lot could be learned from him. I don't know, I could go on and on. Heidegger was, I think, really instrumental, not necessarily in the most positive of ways, but I think he laid a lot of the groundwork for the kind of Marxist philosophies that have taken root. Certainly Hegel did that, Kant. Yeah, I don't know. I could go on and on.
Do you know who Michael Millerman is?
I don't think I do. Is he a more modern philosopher? Or?
Well, he's been on my show. He's a he was a Canadian professor who
Okay.
got demonized for being one of the translators of Alexander Dugin. The
Oh, okay.
do you know who Alexander Dugin is? He's very fascinating.
Mhm.
He wrote a book, what was it, the fourth political theory, and a couple really fascinating books. And so Michael Millerman, his family's from Eastern Europe, so he found his books. He could read Alexander Dugin, found his books very fascinating. His philosophy is very fascinating. Started translating them, and then people were like, "How dare you translate this guy who is close to Putin and is influential to Putin?" And it's like, well, he's just a philosopher who has
Yeah.
interesting ideas, and so him, and then he's also a big fan of Leo Strauss and some of his work, which I find really fascinating because when I had Michael Millerman on, we talked about like you can't research Leo Strauss without finding like neocons who like him and like
Right.
Peter Thiel and and it's like, how about you just read his work and
Right.
try to capture his ideas and understand his ideas, and don't worry about who likes them, who else likes them. But that's the one thing I love about philosophy was like this idea of nothing is settled, right? Like everything can be debated. And also it was a exercise in understanding that you can disagree with somebody and still be able, like you said, like even a broken clock's right twice a day. Like you could disagree with a philosopher on maybe his theory on this, but then he could have a profound theory on this that is, mind expanding and really a interesting perspective. And most philosophers are still debating a lot of the same things they've always debated. Like nothing is really settled. The questions have been asked over and over again, and it's more about the journey of trying to figure these things out and having those discussions than it is like actually trying to find an answer. And the same things, like I said, like philosophers today are still debating the same things that the classic philosophers are debating. And it's a good way of like reminding ourselves, like there's a lot we don't know, and there's much more we don't know than we do know. And there's also many different perspectives. Something that Millerman talks a lot about, how his perspective on the Republic and some of these novels are coming from a Strauss translation is different than like somebody else's. And like that's something that we don't take in consideration too, is like who's translating it, how their personal perspectives and affects their interpretation of what they're translating or sharing with you, which means that like it's going to affect your perspective on it. These are all like very fascinating discussions, because it's like so much of what we think we understand, we're like, okay, yeah, this is the interpretation of Plato. Well, it's like based on these people, but then somebody else will read the same thing. It's no different than you're an artist, you're a actress. Like that a song, a movie, a painting can be interpreted in many different ways, and we're all just trying to figure out what the creator was thinking or what was inspiring the creator, but we can't be certain that we do understand it the same way they understood it.
No, for sure. For sure. Yeah. I think that what's really interesting to look at the cycle of philosophy throughout the years, right? Where you have like the Renaissance periods, the Enlightened periods, and with the times of metaphysics, and then they move into the empiricism and logic. And I think it would be great to see. I think one of the problems is that we've moved so far away. We were talking about like scientism, right? We've moved so far away from metaphysics. And there's so much that is human. So philosophy is all about the questions, right? Because there is so much that we don't know. And it is a testament to the human spirit and human curiosity, wanting to understand. We're meaning-making creatures. We want to know, we want to understand, but to have the humility to acknowledge that we may never. So it's not science is finished, the science is settled. No, it is, well, now we have another theory that we put forth. We've tested it, and maybe, for now that the test stands and it seems to be pretty solid until, we get a better question. We ask a better question that pokes a hole in that theory. And I think that the problem is, as we move more and more towards a more empirical type philosophical framework. And I mean this kind of, as a time period as humanity, and we move further and further away from the metaphysical. I'm not saying there's not merit in empiricism. There absolutely is. I mean, I don't need to be a meteorologist to tell you when it's raining. Sometimes there's just value in like, oh, it's wet outside, it's raining, but I think that because as humans, we are limited, that there's just, we live in 3 dimensions, and yet we have a pretty, it's pretty reasonable to think that there's more dimensions than 3, but we can't fathom what even 4 dimensions is like. We have no capacity to truly fathom what the 4th dimension is. So we can theorize, but that's metaphysical. It's not the concrete, it's not the tangible. And I think that that's what's problematic, is that we've moved so far away from that. We've demonized anything that could be the metaphysical realm, and therefore we've limited ourselves from getting closer to the very things that philosophy is there to do, to ask those questions. And science also. Science is there to to be a method. I look at philosophy as like the father of science, both hard science and social science, because it raises the questions for the science and social scientists to then test, and to, that's to create the hypothesis, to then test their theories and move forth. And then hopefully the philosophers come around again, raise more questions, and define terms. That's a huge, defining terms is definitely a key, component of philosophy. So
Yeah, it's funny because some people see it as this pointless pursuit, right? Of like, oh, you're just asking all these questions. It's and it's the way I look at it, I'm like, it's not pointless, because so many things that you think are black and white, like it's really easy. Like we all know what, like somebody was, I was talking to somebody and they're like, oh, we all know what's good and bad. We know like murder is unjust. I'm like, I'm like, based on like whose perspective and what, whose morals, right? Because you get somebody who thinks like, okay, whatever, like a pedo, for example, like somebody might say, look at that, and it's an extreme example, but just a example of how we can have different perspectives on, like, most people can agree that's bad, that act, but then how did that person would be disagreed on, right? Like this idea of like, okay, could you justify?
They're trying to normalize it now, so
but do you justify, can you justify death with death, right? Like if somebody killed somebody, is it this is my little distractions that my kids walked into the studio, but if somebody murders somebody, would it be like, would the death penalty be just or not? And it's like, these are all questions that are still debated and should be debated, and they're not cut and dry. There is no internal or universal truth in regards to a lot of these topics. Like people's perspectives and their spiritual beliefs and all these things, like what is good, what is bad, all these things can kind of be debated. I mean, I think that's the thing about kind of like a progressiveness. It's like now they take that and put it on steroids, and then it's like now we're debating like what is a woman, we're debating what is gender. Like it's gone like way off the rails and too far. And I'd like to next time we talk, because I'd love for you to dive into Alexander Dugan, and he's done some great interviews with Michael Millerman, and get your perspective on that stuff. But one thing they talk about, and I've kind of talked a lot about on the show recently, because I find it so fascinating, this idea of the Enlightenment, and how like the Enlightenment led us down this path that where we are today, where it's like you took supernatural and spirituality and religion, and you said this is all bad, this is restricting our understanding of the world, and we should only care about things we can prove and we understand, and we're intelligent and you're not. And then that also leads down the path of not caring so much about what are you guys right? Not carry, and then becoming more materialistic, more about and then we don't have we don't have a care for connecting with the universe or connecting with ourselves. Like all this stuff is like becomes like this supernatural nonsense, and everything kind of pigeonholed as like anything that's not provable in science is just supernatural nonsense. And
Yep.
so you could almost see how that path started with what a lot of people will look at historically as a good thing, like the Enlightenment. Oh, this is when we became enlightened, we became more intelligent, we had a, and it's like you can really see how it has almost led us down the path that brought us all these issues that now we have.
I couldn't agree more. So the podcast that I recently, it's going to be released tomorrow, but the topic that I presented was how Gnosticism paved the way for the transhuman agenda. And I think that is exactly right. It is the hyper materialism, the hyper moving away from metaphysical, supernatural, because really it's a hybrid, right? We live in a physical realm, and so therefore, yes, we want to be able to understand as much as we possibly can about the tangible and the concrete, and that is done through empirical study. However, there's so much that we have no way of accessing. There's so much that we can't possibly fathom or understand or even come in contact with. And so, I mean, Democritus discovered atoms, right? He certainly didn't have a microscope. So there's so much that we have a way of conceptualizing that, where we have like little indications of, because human beings are intuitive, and because human beings are, I believe that we do have a spiritual component, right? That I think that it's so ironic that Yuval Noah Harari is going around saying that we have no free will anymore, and that that's a thing of the past, and we have no soul, we have no consciousness. But meanwhile, the singularity is near, Ray Kurzweil, and we're going to upload your souls and your consciousness to this Highborg mind, aka like the Skynet or something. And but wait, how do those two coexist if we don't have consciousness, if we don't have souls, and we have no free will, but yet you want to upload it to this, Highborg mind? So I think it really did pave the way. I think that, to speak to your point, I think it absolutely moved us into this, and that's so much more controllable, right? Because I think, to me, it's like I actually think it's what gives us hope. It gives me hope that their plans will fail, because they underestimate that intangible component of humanity. It is that spiritual, whatever you want to call it, but that intangible. Humans are so much more than what we know we are. And I think it's that aspect of humanity that is not going to be controllable, and that will not be able to become just part of the AI transhumanist scientific, scientism agenda. So.
Yeah, and that's why flat earthers, when they talk about being lied to, like people are always like, well, why would they lie about that? And when they talk about the idea that they wanted to make humans seem insignificant, and
Right.
seem like they're not important, like, oh, the universe is huge and we're just like a little speck on, in the universe, and it was all just happenstance, and it was all, to me, like, I could see that argument. I could see why they would benefit from doing that, from
Right.
us that we're just, not important.
She wants to be part of the conversation.
And she has been,
Yeah.
she has been indirectly. But for people listening who yeah, no, my son wants to get in there.
Hello.
You want to say hi, Ricardo?
Hello.
For people listening who, well, definitely have to do this again, because there's so many topics that
Yeah, let's definitely do it again. This was awesome.
let's let people know who where they can get your show, the type of topics you well, it sounds like it's very similar to my show, so if they like my show, they'll like your show, and all the audio platforms, video platforms you're on, and all the best places to keep up with your work.
Yay. Well, thank you. Yeah. So I have my website, CourtenayTurner.com. It is being redone. It should be launched within the next few weeks, and that will have everything. All my articles, all my podcasts will be on there directly, which will be awesome, because I've recently been deplatformed. Well, not deplatformed. They just wiped out my entire channel. So I'm no longer on YouTube. I may start putting little clips. I don't know, but probably I'm just going to stay off. So I'm on Rockfin. I'm on Rumble. I'm on BitChute. I'm on Odyssey. I am in the process of seeing about getting on Brighteon and Band.video. And I'm on the audio platforms on the Megaphone. I'm on Podbean. I'm on Apple Podcasts. I am on Spotify, iHeartRadio. And and then my social media is Twitter at Courtenay Turner. And I spell my name like Courtenay. So the Courtenay Turner podcast is Courtenay Turner. That's how it's spelled. I do pronounce my name Courtenay, but it's spelled Courtenay. And Instagram is at Kinetic Quartz. So.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll put all those links in the show description. And, I'll definitely reconnect soon. I'll send you. Well, did you end up recording this on your end? If not,
yeah, I did. Yeah, it's on my end, so you can do the same and tell everybody where to find you and your show and all that.
So the rippleeffectpodcast.com. The audio is available everywhere, and the video is available on just about everywhere, minus YouTube, because like yourself, I got banned off YouTube. So, but it's available everywhere else. I do have a YouTube clips channel that I just started, but come to find out, it's just as time consuming to do a podcast as it is to do clips. I'm like,
that's why I haven't done it. Yep.
Yeah, I'm like, I end up listening to the whole show again anyways to find something interesting, the most interesting parts, and then you cut it. It's just, I'm like, it's so time consuming. So it gets neglected quite a bit, but I try to have a presence on YouTube because obviously people who are on like Rockfin or Odyssey, like we are, they're the people that kind of already are into some of the stuff that we're talking about. Right. But YouTube, there's still a lot of people who don't know those platforms exist. YouTube still gets the average normie who might, enjoy running into our work and be like, oh, wow, I've never heard this perspective. So it's, but yeah. So, and then the rippleeffectpodcast.com or rickyverans.com, both URLs will bring you to the same place. And my website has everything. So it'll be an easy way to connect with me. I have a Telegram chat. I have, I don't know, I'm on float.app, I'm on Parler, Getter, Facebook. You just, basically anywhere will let me share these conversations, I'll jump on there. So
me too. Yeah, I'm on all of those as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Then I'll also have to invite you on the next Union of Unwanted, which is what is it? I think we just did one on the 11th, so our next one is on the 25th. So okay. We live stream on Rockfin every other Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern time. And then from there, we, it gets uploaded as audio everywhere. And the video is typically available within like a couple days on Odyssey. And, but the live stream is exclusively on Rockfin. It used to be on YouTube, and then obviously that show, just like every show, was getting censored. So we're like, you know what, let's do it on Rockfin, so that way we don't have to worry about getting banned or whatnot. So it's but we'll have to because it's a great way of connecting with people. It's a great way, that show, because it brings in so many different audiences. It does awesome. And we only put out 2 shows a month, and it kind of has blown my mind how well the show does. But I think it's because it is one of those shows that it brings in people, libertarians, people from the left, people from the right, people who are, and we all just come together to try to, expose corruption, share interesting perspectives and ideas and stories, and realize that we're all on the same team, even if we disagree on some things.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's on the 25th?
Yeah, that'll be the 25th.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to that. And yeah, let's definitely do this again, because I think there are so many rabbit holes we can go down. It'd be super, super fun. I always make the joke. I say that, just hand me a bag of carrots and I'll go down the rabbit hole. Yeah.
These are my favorite type of discussions, because it's same thing with like Dr. Jessica Rose. Like she's a regular on the show because there's so many things I can just bounce off her and talk to her about, so it's like, there's endless amounts of things we could discuss, and one story will lead us down, on one episode, a story will lead us down one path, and we start talking mostly about this, and then another episode we bring up this, and that leads us down, so Monica Perez from the Propaganda Report's another one who's like, maybe that's what I'll do a little round table. And get I'm
doing one with her and someone else in 2 weeks, actually. Yeah.
Monica's awesome. And the cool thing about when I have her on my show, because and she would be somewhere on your show, she would be open to talk about many topics that typically she's not talking about, like a lot of times when she's on other people's shows, it's about like, current events and that type of stuff. So to be able to talk about, ancient aliens and mystery,
Tartaria.
Yeah. So it's
Xarians. Yeah.
So But yeah, well, I was gonna say I'll send you the links once it's up and live, but you'll have the link to the audio and video from this recording. But
Yes.
either way, I'll make sure that once it's up and live on my channel and website and stuff like that, I'll send you the links and I'll get all your stuff in the show description. And
Mhm.
we'll definitely have to reconnect soon.
All right. Looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Courtney, and thank you for being so flexible. I know I was running late from work, and you know you were very flexible with I hopefully I didn't remind you of your friend that's always late.
No, not the no, no, it was awesome. It actually worked really well for me today. So yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Courtney. We'll talk again, and thanks again for all the time. I really appreciate it.
Likewise.
Take care.
Bye.